Thank you, Neil. You read it just the way I wrote it. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Neil. And to all of the hardworking staff at the Politics and Eggs here at the Institute, we thank you for all the good work that you do here to make these programs flawless. And also a shout out to our staff at the New England Council, led by our good friend Larry Zaba. So together, it's a winning team. And I just say thank you to all of you. I also give my gratitude to all of the sponsors, as Neil alluded to. We wouldn't be where we are today without sponsors paying for all of the breakfast, the venue. So we thank all of the corporate sponsors who are giants in the neighborhood here in this great state. They're always there on a worthy cause. They step up to the plate, so it's not just making a profit, but making a difference in their community. So each of the banners, if you know anyone that's affiliated with me, should say thank you. Thank you for being part of our wonderful community. Fall has gotten off to a very busy start here at the New England Council, and I just want to take a moment to flag a couple of our upcoming events. On Tuesday, we will hold the next installment of our very popular Inside the Corner Office. It's a virtual series when our guest will be the leader of one of New Hampshire's largest healthcare systems, Dr. Joanne Conroy, the CEO of Dartmouth Health. In the next several weeks, we'll be hosting in-person Capitol Hill report breakfast with Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, Congressman Seth Moulton of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and Congressman Jim McGovern. Also this month, we look forward to a New England Innovates program, looking at some of the incredible work in our region to combat Alzheimer's disease. Senator Ed Markey will be the keynote speaker for that event in Boston on October 25th. But today, we are honored to welcome Maryland Governor Larry Hogan back to the Granite State. The governor was our guest here at Politics and Eggs back in 2019. He's currently serving his second term as the Maryland's 62nd governor. And throughout his time in office, he has consistently ranked among the most popular governors in our country, often vying, I think, with a governor here as well as the governor south of here, Charlie Baker. I think I just read in the Washington Post the governor's favorability is now 73%, which is extraordinary, and it's across the table, the Democrats, Republicans, Independents. So leaving after 2 terms with 73% is truly extraordinary. The governor has worked to foster a more business-friendly future environment in his state through tax relief, balanced budgets, and long-term fiscal responsibility. Education has also been a top priority for the governor, and he has invested record funding 6 years in a row, totaling some $48 billion in local K-12 education, while also advocating for innovative solutions to close the performance gap and prepare students for the future. And so, there's no surprise that in 2019, he was unanimously elected to lead the American governors as chairman of the nonpartisan National Governors Association, where he focused on the need to modernize America's infrastructure. Needless to say, we are delighted that the governor could join us here today in New Hampshire once again to share his vision for our country. Please join me in welcoming a very warm Politics and Eggs welcome to the Honorable Governor Larry Hogan.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be here, Jim. Thank you for the very kind introduction. I think he probably made up most of that, but it sounded really good. Thank you. Neil, thank you for your warm welcome, and it's such an honor to be back here at St. A's. I want to thank the student ambassadors who greeted me when I pulled up outside today, and thank all of you for being here this morning. I got to give a shout out to the New England Council and the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, and I want to thank President Favazza and St. Anselm for giving me this opportunity, and I'd like to thank every one of you for taking time to be here this morning. First thing I'll say is that those wooden eggs are really hard to sign. You know, I've signed a lot of things. I've signed shirts and hats and baseballs and footballs, but wooden eggs probably take the cake. You know, my handwriting is bad enough on a piece of paper. on a flat table, but that was quite a challenge, but it's a wonderful tradition nonetheless. This is my second time speaking here at Politics and Eggs, and I'm so honored to be back here again. I'm surprised that they invited me back again. Usually I come one time and they kick me out, but thank you for having me. Once again, it's really great to be with you. It's the third time in just a few months that I've been spending time here in New Hampshire, not just because it's a beautiful state this time of year, and the leaves are changing. We haven't started to see that in Maryland yet, so it's a great time to be here and meet some wonderful people. But obviously, New Hampshire plays a unique and important role in shaping our nation's future. And New Hampshire should continue in that role as the first primary state in the nation. Granite staters, regardless of their party affiliation, have a long tradition of taking that responsibility seriously and greeting every candidate or every out-of-town elected official with common decency and an open, independent mind. And that tradition, I think, is exemplified by this terrific event and by those iconic wooden eggs that I just signed. It's a tradition that also achieves even getting college students out of bed for an event that begins before 8 in the morning, which I want to thank all of the students for being here. I'll admit that I did not often achieve that feat when I was a college student at Florida State University. I like to sleep in a little bit. But the spirit of civic engagement found here in New Hampshire, I believe, really represents the best of our democracy, and we need more of it rather than less of it. So when I received the invitation to speak once again to Politics and Eggs about the future of our country, just a few weeks before another critically important election, I didn't hesitate at the opportunity. I was here in Manchester in August to headline an event for the New Hampshire Republican Caucus because as a governor, I understand and believe that America's comeback will start with common sense conservative leadership in the states. In July, we were here to release our 5-point plan to provide Americans relief from crushing inflation, and it was based on things that we've already accomplished in our state of Maryland. And I traveled all across New Hampshire to hear firsthand the concerns of hard-working Granite Staters on the front lines of the inflation crisis. I toured Novel Iron Works, a second-generation family-owned steel fabricator in Greenland. I drank beer with home builders in Portsmouth. I met with commercial realtors in Bedford. I had lunch with contractors in Manchester. And I heard from families all across the state who are being crushed by the rising cost of living and a worsening housing crisis. And I heard about their concerns and worries about being able to afford the cost of heating fuel this winter. And I heard from so many folks here in New Hampshire who have never been more concerned about the direction of our country. In 2014, I was hearing very similar concerns in my home state of Maryland. And back then, Maryland looked a lot like Washington does today. It was an arrogant, out-of-touch, one-party monopoly. They were calling Maryland the California of the East. And trust me, they did not mean that as a compliment. Maryland had raised taxes 43 times in a row. It crushed our economy. We lost 8,000 businesses, more than 100,000 jobs. And a Gallup poll came out that said 48% of all Marylanders wanted to leave the state. And at that point, I was just a small businessman, completely fed up with politics. I'd never held elective office before. But I was fed up enough to try to step up and do something about what was happening to the state that I loved. Now, the media, the political establishment, and the career politicians in Annapolis were all against me. We had very little money in a campaign because people didn't believe that we had a chance to win in the bluest state in America. Not a soul really believed that it was possible for a Republican to win in our state. We ran an underfunded underdog campaign, built kind of a New Hampshire-style grassroots campaign effort where I just went around the state and met every single person I could multiple times and shook their hands and showed up everywhere and outworked everyone. And I talked about the issues that most people cared about. And I promised to get the government off our backs and out of our pockets so we could help grow our small businesses and put people back to work and turn our economy around. And we built a big tent coalition of Republicans, independents, and Reagan Democrats. And we pulled off the biggest surprise upset in America. And then we did something that rarely ever happens in politics today. We actually did exactly what we said we were going to do. We changed the entire mission of state government to be unabashedly pro-jobs and pro-business. We eliminated or rewrote thousands of job-killing regulations. I'm the only governor in America who got an overwhelmingly Democratic legislature, more than 70% in both houses. We got the legislature to cut taxes, and we did it 8 years in a row by $4.7 billion. You know, I inherited a $5.1 billion deficit. We turned it into the largest surplus in state history, $5.5 billion in reserves, so more than a $10 billion turnaround. We took our state's overall economic performance from 49th out of 50 states to number 6. That was the biggest economic turnaround in America. And when politicians pandered to the far left dangerous lunacy of defund the police, I was the first elected leader in America to speak out loudly against it. And the reality is that our police are underfunded and under attack. And to reverse the rising tide of violent crime, we need to stop demonizing and sabotaging the dedicated men and women who risk their lives every single day to keep the rest of us safe, which is why I pushed for and enacted a Refund the Police initiative, which invested $500 million more into state and local police. And now others all across America are following our lead. 2015, I had only been governor for 89 days when the worst violence in 47 years broke out in our largest city of Baltimore. And the mayor said that she wanted to give the rioters, quote, room to destroy. And I instead immediately declared a state of emergency. I sent in an additional 1,000 police officers and 4,000 members of the National Guard into the city. I was following the Reagan doctrine of peace through strength. We allowed for peaceful protests, but we immediately stopped the violence. And then I walked the streets of Baltimore for a week, meeting with community leaders and faith leaders and the NAACP. We worked hard to lower the temperature and to listen to the concerns. And the people of Baltimore thanked me for restoring peace and law and order to their community. And they knew that we had their backs and that I would never put politics before public safety. And then in the summer of 2020, when cities all across America were facing unrest, Baltimore was relatively peaceful. And city residents worked with us to keep Baltimore safe. Now, we didn't accomplish any of this by resorting to the phony partisan posturing that is so typical in this age of performative politics. In my first inaugural address in 2015, I pledged that the politics that have divided our nation need not divide our state, and they haven't. We have achieved common sense, bipartisan solutions that work for all the people of our state. And while most Americans believe that our nation is way off track, the overwhelming majority of Marylanders believe that our state is headed in the right direction. In 2018, when Republicans were getting wiped out all across the country, in our deep blue state with a big blue wave and a big blue year, I became only the second Republican governor to be reelected in the entire 242-year history of our state. And we have completely debunked the false narrative that the way you vote is predetermined by the color of your skin, where you live, where you were born, or where you worship. We succeeded by growing the tent and by convincing voters that we had the right ideas and the competence to actually get things done. And over the past 8 years, just down the road from our nation's capital, we have already shown a better path forward. And if we can do it in Maryland, then there's really no place in America where these very same principles will not succeed. America is at a critical turning point. In Washington, the Democratic Party is dragging us in a far left direction that America does not want and cannot afford. Now, Joe Biden said he would govern from the center, but instead he caters to the far left extremes of his party, and he flails from crisis to crisis, showing weakness to the world. Biden promised to work toward uniting the country, but instead he attacks millions of Americans who voted against him as a threat to democracy. While America is beset by out-of-control inflation and energy crisis is hurting struggling families and small businesses, and violent crime is devastating our cities and communities, the Biden administration jams through a reckless grab bag of progressive wish list items, massive spending and tax hikes, and handouts to special interests. Instead of developing our nation's abundant energy supply and increasing domestic production, the Biden administration goes hat in hand, begging a dictator in Venezuela for oil. Around the world, America's enemies are emboldened and on the march. Russia invades a peaceful neighbor and threatens the United States and our NATO allies for supporting the freedom of the brave people of Ukraine. China steals our intellectuals' property and makes common cause with our enemies around the world. North Korea and Iran threaten the peace, stability, and security of the world as emerging nuclear powers and reckless aggressors and enemies of freedom. After the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, our allies question whether they should still trust us, and our enemies question whether they should still fear us. The majority of Americans today believe that our nation is way off track and heading in the wrong direction. Most Americans are thoroughly convinced that we are hopelessly divided, that our political system is fundamentally broken, and that Washington is completely dysfunctional. The voices of what I would call the exhausted majority are ignored in deference to the demands of the loudest and angriest few, who seem hell-bent on tearing America apart. And when so many Americans feel that neither party is delivering for them, the result is unrestrained, toxic politics, rabid tribalism, and hatred of the other. And neither side really seems to want to make progress. They'd rather make demands and win arguments on Twitter. Look, I'm willing to stand up and fight for the things that really matter, but not for status quo politics as usual, and not to perpetuate polarization and paralysis. America needs workhorses, not more show ponies. It's time for less talk and more action. I don't come from the performative arts school of politics. I come from the get to work and get things done school of politics. And I'll work with anyone who wants to do the people's business. I recently returned from a 2-week trade mission to Japan and South Korea. And everywhere I went, I heard from our allies who still believe in America, but they worry that America is too divided to believe in itself. They see politicians in both parties who no longer have confidence and faith in the American people, and those who doubt whether we can or should still lead the free world. They see politicians who simply find scapegoats to blame for their own problems and failures. Look, we aren't going to fix any of this by catering to the extremes and the loudest and angriest voices. We do it by standing up against the extremes and for the majority of Americans. We do it with a hopeful, positive vision for America. The divisiveness and dysfunction that we see every day in Washington only makes our country weaker. Our nation's true strength comes from that exhausted majority of Americans who are united in defense of the values that make our nation great. Most Americans understand that there's nothing compassionate about a breakdown of law and order. Strength is compassionate when it's in the service of protecting others. Most Americans believe that we should finally demand real fiscal responsibility from Washington. They want to stop raising taxes, reduce job-killing red tape, and restore American energy independence. Most Americans want parents to have more choice in their child's education. And they think that we should address the college debt crisis by making college more affordable and expanding access to opportunity, not by transferring debt to hardworking taxpayers. Most Americans want us to stand up for our allies and stand up to our enemies, not abandon our allies and appease our enemies. Ladies and gentlemen, despite our imperfections and all of the serious challenges that we face, America remains the greatest nation on earth. You know, people all across the world still yearn to come here, to become Americans. The rest of the world still looks to us for leadership and inspiration. I would say just ask yourself, even on our darkest days, where on earth would you rather live than the United States of America? Americans are not tired of freedom and democracy. They're tired of failed leadership, and they're fed up with politicians who put their own self-interest before America. Those of us blessed by your trust should give you a government that doesn't act as if it's something apart from you, but one that is of the people, by the people, and for the people. A government that appreciates that no one of us has all the answers or all the power. A government that tolerates contrary views among a diverse citizenry without making them into enemies or doubting their patriotism. A government that can discuss and debate with as much civility as passion, and with a view to persuade, not to intimidate, to encourage, not to demonize or defeat. A government that can take on the big problems and make things better for all our citizens. A government that all of America can be proud of. Ladies and gentlemen, the best days of America are still ahead of us. We can change our nation for the better so that America can once again be that shining city on a hill. There is a better path forward if only we have the courage to seize it. Thank you. God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
We have time for some questions, and if you raise your hand, identify yourself so the Governor knows who you are. Governor, just a couple of questions. President Biden moved to cancel federal student loan. You were pretty strong in your opposition to that move. Can you just explain in more detail?
Sure. Yeah, look, I think that student debt is a serious problem in America, and many people are overburdened with debt, and I think it's an issue we should try to address, and we've tried to address it in a number of ways. But passing on the debt from people who had the opportunity and privilege to go get a college degree and took on that debt and transferring it over to hardworking people struggling taxpayers, middle-class families who didn't maybe have that opportunity. Doesn't seem fair. So what we've done in our state is we've worked hard to make our 17 colleges and universities more affordable, to hold the line on tuition increases. We proposed legislation to allow people to deduct the interest on their student loans off of their state taxes. We've tried to work to alternative pathways to careers and success with 28 new apprenticeship programs, including things like cybersecurity and healthcare fields. And we put record funding into our colleges and universities, but also our community colleges. And not everyone has the opportunity to come to this tremendous tradition here at St. A's. Or I spoke last night to Harvard. I mean, they're wonderful institutions, but everybody doesn't have to have a 4-year degree. There are people moving on to very successful careers by learning skills that are needed for the 21st century. So I think I was against I think the president overstepped his bounds in executive authority. I don't think he has the authority to waive all those student loans, and I think probably Congress should act to limit that in the future so that people don't expect that all of their loans are going to be wiped out just with a stroke of a pen.
One of the most pressing issues that we just can't seem to get our arms around in trying to find a solution is immigration. Some of your fellow governors in other parts of the country have taken immigration to a higher level and sending some of the newly arrived immigrants to different parts of this country. Your thoughts on how we can address this issue? There are some people out there that believe that the issue is more important than the solution. Just keep the issue alive. Your thoughts on how we can seriously address the issue? And what do you think of your colleagues, of other governors, Texas, Florida, using this immigration issue?
Well, obviously, immigration is a huge issue and problem that has not been addressed by either party or by any of our leaders for a long time. I mean, I was a chairman of Youth for Reagan back in 1980. And I can tell you that Reagan talked about fixing immigration, and we've been talking about it ever since. It doesn't matter who's in charge of Congress or who the president is. It's something that we all agree is a problem and an issue, but we don't seem to come up with any kind of a bipartisan, common sense solution. And I think most people would agree that we need a secure border to begin with, and we've got to stop, open borders and having, human trafficking and dangerous drugs and people crossing the border is not the answer. That's some of my Democratic friends think that's the answer. Republicans are demonizing the issue, and look, I think we've got to secure the border and then find a pathway to citizenship. We've got to look at a process that we have huge shortages in certain workforce problems in industries all across America that we could solve by trying to fix that immigration problem and bringing in the people we actually need to do jobs that Americans don't want. But I think it's a mistake. I talked to my governor colleagues about this. I did join in with 23 other governors with a border strike force to try to secure the border because I think the federal government is failing in that regard. But I thought it was a mistake to, basically I think do publicity stunts of busing people out of from the border up to other states. And I know, I said they put thousands of them in Washington D.C., which is right next to my state, and I reminded my colleagues that we didn't have border patrol at the Maryland D.C. line, and that they were dropping these thousands of folks in buses. They were crossing into my state, and it was now a problem I had to deal with rather than them. And I know Governor DeSantis, who had nothing to do with the issue, after Governor Abbott was doing it in Texas, he went to Texas and basically, grabbed 50 people and sent them to Martha's Vineyard as a publicity stunt, and I think it was a terrible idea. Let's just try to address the issue seriously and fix the problem rather than trying to get on TV. It's back to what I was saying earlier about the performative politics. It's not a serious discussion. It's not a good solution.
You've mentioned that inflation is one of the biggest issues that we face right now. What can a president do to address the inflation? Some people believe that it's really the job of the Federal Reserve to spend their time addressing it. But what do you think the president can do to address it?
Well, there aren't any easy solutions, but obviously the Federal Reserve has taken some action. But it took a while, setting the tone and letting people know what the problem is and how you might go about fixing it is kind of important. And I think that was a failure of the Biden administration for a long time. They said there was no inflation problem and wasn't going to be an inflation problem. They kept downplaying it. And then they changed their message to, well, sure, we're going to have some inflation, but it's transitory and it's not going to be a serious problem. And now they're like, oh, heck, it looks like we're going to have a really bad inflation problem, but we don't know what to do about it. So I think, it's going to take, smarter people than me and maybe some of the smart students in this room. We've got to figure out how to really go after addressing the problem. But we experience inflation already. We have supply chain crisis. We're not producing our domestic energy. The cost of everything is rising. We're faced with the possible recession ahead, and I think the folks in Washington, both in the executive branch and in the legislative branch, this should be their top focus. I think it's the number one concern of people in America, but it's not the number one concern of the people in Washington.
Questions? Anyone want to identify yourself?
Hi, Representative Matt Petaro, representing Allenstown, New Hampshire, in our State House. Part of your speech, you talked about convincing a Democratic supermajority in your state legislature to vote for tax decreases. I'm wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Sure. Well, it goes to my philosophy of, we passionately disagree, and I don't want to give you the false impression that my progressive legislature agrees to everything that I want to do or that I agree with everything that they try to pass. We still have some squabbles. We just try to do it in a fairly respectful way without, just getting into a battle where you're calling each other names. But we came together, and so we cut taxes, tolls, and fees 8 years in a row. And some of it I could do on my own with the fees and the tolls, but the taxes I can't cut without the legislature. And we didn't succeed on every chance we tried to cut taxes, but we stopped every single tax increase for 8 years. I saw myself as like kind of playing goalie, stopping bad things from happening in addition to trying to make good things happen. But yeah, last year we passed the largest tax cut in state history. And it was the pitch that I made was because of the pandemic and the struggles we had, people were suffering, small business owners and hardworking families, and so we had a $1.46 billion tax relief. Because we had turned our economy around and we had such a huge surplus, we were able to give some of it back to the taxpayers. It passed nearly unanimously, Republicans and Democrats, and that was the biggest tax cut in history until this year, when we passed $1.86 billion in tax cuts, which is now the biggest tax cut in history. And we got nearly everybody on board with that, and that was including the Retirement Tax Elimination Act. I've been talking about this for 8 years, and I finally got it done in my last session. People were leaving our state because, they could move to next door to Delaware, or they could move to Florida or any other number of southern states and not pay income on their retirement income, and Maryland was taxing them. And so they're going to phase it in rather than doing it all at once like I wanted to do, but we're going to eliminate the retirement tax, and we're going to basically trying to take the burden off of lower income folks, struggling middle class folks, and retirees and small business owners, all of whom have been struggling, and we don't want the government to be a bigger problem. And I convinced my legislature because, I mentioned about the approval ratings, and, when you have a 73% approval rating, including 70% among Democrats and 74 among Republicans and 77 with independents, the Democrats in the legislature pay attention and they listen. The public was behind all of these things we tried to do, and by huge numbers, 70-80% of the people in the state agree with what I was saying. Even though they didn't want to do it, they decided it was a smart thing to do.
Do we have another softball question for the governor? Yes, ma'am. Down front.
Oh, Rita Matson. You say that, so I live over in Dublin, and in Keene, they are dropping people off in the middle of the night in black vans with windows blacked out, and nobody knows about it. So you're calling it a publicity stunt that they drop people off in the middle of the day someplace that is a sanctuary city, and you think that's a publicity stunt. And I'm saying, what are we going to do to draw people's attention to this and get the border closed?
Yeah, well, no, I agree. That's what I said in my earlier answer. That's why I joined 23 other governors in the border strike force and calling on the Biden administration to completely reverse their immigration policy. And we do need to close the border. And I understand the frustration, and I have had this conversation with Governor Abbott in Texas, the frustration of the federal government's doing nothing, and the states are having to do the federal government's job. And I just don't, and Governor Abbott is trying to get thousands of people out of his state and dropping thousands of them. And Washington did get a lot of attention. I didn't like the most recent stunt, really, when somebody that was taking people from a different state and one busload and dropping them in New England. That really was just to get attention, I think. It didn't solve any problem. There are tens of thousands of people crossing the border, and 50 people dropping off in Martha's Vineyard, I don't think is going to fix it.
Other questions? Former United States Congressman Michael Harrington,
I have
who
a
I believe
microphone for you.
served with your dad
Oh,
on the Judiciary
sorry.
Committee in 1970.
Governor, we've established my dated history and appreciate the reference again. You have 330 million people in this country, and I'd suggest those that are putting their hands up this afternoon on the Constitution or elsewhere know more about the Constitution of this country than most of the people, including myself, in this room. Country needs, in my opinion, boot camp when it comes to civics, and it ought not be basically the way of supplementing the local high school coach's football salary.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? I'm looking at public service due as a part of your birthright here in this country.
Yes.
But in general, looking out as a partisan, take a look at the barren Democratic bench looking at 2024. Any way you want to handle it, I'm not attempting to broaden it universally, but I think the audience is still a part of those that could plead nonfeasance, but certainly we need more focus substantively on the Constitution itself and the meaning of it.
Well, thank you very much, Congressman, and I agree with you. And I think civics education and teaching our young people at the earliest age possible about what the country is all about and understanding the Constitution and the founding principles of the nation. I think we have gotten away from that, and we've been pushing. I think some group recognized us as having in Maryland the best civics program in the country, the most balanced, or something to that effect. I'll have to go back and check what the award was, but it is something that we're focused on. And I look around the room, there's so many of our young people, the students here today, and they really are the future of this country. And the ones here obviously are focused and interested in politics and public service, but not enough young people are. And we're not going to be able to solve I'm not going to solve all these problems, and Congressman, you and I are not going to be able to fix it. But this next generation is going to have to. They're going to be inheriting some serious problems, and the country's kind of a mess right now. And so it does give me hope that there are young people focused on these things, and I think we do need to focus more on bringing people back to basics in our school systems, and I think that's part of the push. A lot of people are pushing, the parents are getting more involved in local school systems, and I think that's one of the issues. I think I hear from people across the country that kids aren't learning the things they should be learning.
Other questions for the governor? Yes, ma'am. Andrew Hesing.
Thank you. Governor, I'm Jeannie Card, and I'm going to say that I'm with the exhausted majority that you mentioned so many times.
You don't look exhausted, but
I am exhausted for all the reasons that you enumerated. I wonder, when you're talking to foreign leaders and they're expressing this concern about America and how divided we are and our ability to lead the world, what do you tell them?
Well, I gave a very similar message to what I told you. I said, yes, we do have issues and problems in America. We are divided, but we're not as divided as it seems. I think we're more divided than we've ever been. But I think I think there's more that unites us than divides us, and I think that these are issues that most people are frustrated about and want to try to fix. But yeah, I met with President Yoon, President of South Korea. I met with the foreign minister and the economic minister there. I met with the foreign minister in Japan. And they do see us as their most important ally, and they do look to us, and they're concerned. They weren't saying we're done with America, but they all asked me, and I met with the leaders of most of the largest corporations in Korea and Japan, the chairman of many of the big companies, and all of them expressed the same kind of concerns. And it was basically like, what's going on in America? What are you guys going to fix this? Is everything okay? They're like checking in on us, like, well, how do we help you, fix those problems over there? But I think we have to get back to being the leaders in the world that we have been in the past. And I'm not saying we have to fix everybody's problems or being the police for the world, but I think we need to get back to the country that everybody respects and trusts and believes that allies believe we're going to be there for them and we're going to stand up for them, and enemies say, maybe we don't want to mess with those guys. Peace through strength, like Reagan would say.
Do you give President Biden credit for the way he's handled Ukraine, and in particular, keeping NATO together?
I don't want to, criticize the president in the middle of a situation like that. I give him some credit for taking it seriously. I think he was slow to react and a little bit hesitant in some of the actions that he took. I really give credit to President Zelensky, who I think has done more to unite NATO and to unite people around the world by his brave, courageous stand against a really difficult enemy. I mean, it's just been amazing. And, I think it's a tough situation. There's no easy answers, and you don't want to, Russia is very unstable. There's no telling what the next steps are going to be. But I wish that the president had acted sooner and stronger with the sanctions, and rather than kind of one little bit at a time and then saying, well, maybe now we'll do a little more, or maybe now we'll do a little more. We should have given them the weapons and should have cracked down on the sanctions, I think, right away.
Maybe we could just spend a minute and put your political hat on. You seem to be taking a tentative approach towards making a decision on your future. I assume you will not make a decision on your future political career until after your term ends in mid-January. So just taking a step back, with President Trump, if he does get into the race, what's the lane, what's the avenue for you that would make you a strong, viable candidate?
Well, thank you. Maybe I've reached a conclusion here today after listening. No, I'm just teasing. Make a big announcement. This is a great place to do it, I guess. Look, I have actually never said I was going to be a candidate for president. Obviously, I'm traveling around the country. I've been to about 25 different states, and I'm listening to people and trying to get a feel. I care very deeply about, getting the Republican Party back to winning elections again. I think a competitive, two-party system is essential to our democracy. I'm concerned about the direction of the country, and so I'm going to be a voice somehow. I'm going to do everything I can to be a part of getting the country back on track. I don't know what that path is going to take, frankly. Obviously, I'm here because I want to hear from folks in New Hampshire, and I want to, talk about the things that I care about. But I promised the people of my state who've elected me twice that I was going to finish the job, and I really am. I'm running through the tape. I'm working every day. I've been to every one of our jurisdictions. I'm rolling out new things every day, and I have a job until January 18th. And I think we're going to take a look at what happens in this November election that's coming up next month, just weeks away, and see what the results of that, and the dust will settle. I'm going to be holding kind of a leadership summit, Annapolis Leadership Summit at the end of November, and inviting thought leaders from around the country together to try to talk about the path forward and what we can do to get the country moving in a different direction. And then, I think there are 15, 20 people that are potentially thinking about doing this. I would say every member of the U.S. Senate, every member of Congress, and every governor probably thinks they might have a future in politics, and I'm not sure. But yeah, in most of the discussions, and it really hasn't been me, but people usually mention me in the top, as a potential candidate. And I'll say that I promise that after I'm done being governor, I will take a look at that. But I'm not here to convince you that I'm on that path quite yet. I want to be in position, and if it's not me and I don't see a path, I want to help who I think is the strongest possible candidate, and I think it's really important. And back to about whether President Trump runs or not, I'm not a prognosticator or a pundit. I don't know. I mean, I think it could go either way, and no one's going to influence his decision. If he wants to, he's going to. I don't know that he will. I'm not sure President Biden is going to run, so it's quite possible that both Republican and Democratic primaries are wide open. And the Republican, where is there a lane? I don't know. That's part of what we're trying to find out. Look, I think there are probably 10 people that want to be the next Donald Trump, and I think there may be a different lane. And if you look back to the 2016 election, I think that Donald Trump won most of the early primary states with 20 or 30%. I mean, he didn't win a majority, but there were so many people dividing it up. it's quite possible, but then this next election, there could be a bunch of people fishing in the same pond, dividing it up. And maybe there are 20, 30% right now that want to go in a completely different direction. So we'll see.
Has anyone approached you about maybe running as an independent in 24?
You know, there are people, I think the fastest growing segment right now are independent voters. They're leaving both parties in droves because Democrats, lifelong Democrats, are saying that the parties move too far to the left. Some lifelong Republicans are, kind of fed up with what they see as, going in the wrong direction in their party. So I get the frustration and people saying, what about an independent? And certainly people have asked me the question just like you did, but nobody's really talked to me about it. It's not something I'm interested in. I ran an independent campaign to become governor of Maryland, but I ran as a Republican, and I just had a message that appealed to just as many independents and Democrats, and that's how we were able to pull off a win in a very blue state. And I think that's the right way to go, trying to actually unite people, but I think you have to do it through the existing parties.
And my final question is, if Donald Trump were the nominee of the Republican Party in 2024, would you endorse him?
No, I didn't endorse him last time, and I don't see anything that has convinced me to do otherwise.
Okay. With that, all my questions have been answered. I want to thank the governor for stopping by. I have a feeling that if you're at the Iowa State Fair and you're at, at the Politics and Eggs.
Workshops.
I heard it. So obviously you are thinking in the back of your mind about your future. But we want to thank you for not only being here, but doing all the great work that you have done and continue to do in your great state. And it's extraordinary, really, with government so divided today. And as the governor alluded to, I think the legislature is 2-1 Democrat in Maryland. And for him, the governor, to have a 73% favorability is extraordinary because not only is he popular, but he's effective, and he's making change that people across the board in Maryland approve of. So you have a very strong record to be proud of, and we're proud to have you here today. I have a feeling we're going to see more of you in the future, and if we do, you might need a little overnight bag, and here's
Very
a Politics and Eggs.
Very good.
Okay?
Come on, thank you. Let's get it.
All right, get a picture. Picture here.